Thanks, Shobna. Well, as Shobna has already welcomed you guys, I want to start out with just kind of talking a little bit about this being a SHRP2 and ADC initiative. For the most part, SHRP2 was a collaborative effort between TRB, AASHTO, and Federal Highway, and whereby pretty much TRB handled the research, which initiated for this project back in 2008, and Federal Highway and AASHTO are responsible for deploying and implementing the activities, these efforts going through 2016. And for the big picture, you know, this initiative came about because of it has been a proven success and recommended by the highway community. My boss just kind of walked in the room, so he shook me up. But it's a market-ready initiative. Our leadership determined that because of that, this was a good fit for the EDC 3 innovations. And so basically what that means with it being an EDC initiative, we are able to get additional resources more rapidly and providing and funding needed by the DOTs to help to move it forward, to move to that tipping point. So as Shobna's already mentioned, we're going to have a couple of presentations, but then we're going to move to a panel discussion. And myself, I'm Joe Taylor, and to my right we have Bradley Wifferich from Michigan DOT, who is an engineer of design. Next to him we have Dan Parker, who is the engineer of public improvements at Norfolk Southern. So we're happy to have a railroad here to also represent the railroad side, since this is a collaborative effort between DOTs and railroads. We also have Francis Bedini Giacobini, the rail project manager for Illinois, and he's been working with the CREATE project and several other major projects in Illinois. And next to him we have Michael E. Steed, the rail safety program administrator with the Illinois Commerce Commission. And of course we have Shobna Varma, who will be moderating the session later, who was part of the initial research when it took off. She was part of one of the principal investigators on the project. So I'm going to provide a little background for R16, and basically, as many of you may know, it came about because of delays due to the lack of collaboration between DOTs and railroads. And with railroads now, we're in a climate right now where railroads are actually moving to expand and upgrade their networks, as well as DOTs are looking for ways to reduce the time it takes to complete highway projects. So with that said, you know, we really need to look for new approaches to how to better provide that collaboration between both organizations, so we can, you know, both have better quality products as well as reduce time and delays. So with that said, R16 actually consists of 3 phases, whereby the first phase identifies some of the challenges that these were having, as well as develop some of the solutions to address those challenges. The second phase actually developed some effective strategies to help disseminate this information that came out of the research, and so we can help to get some nationwide adoption. And the third phase developed some tools to help train and institutionalize these innovative strategies, as well as provide some additional resources and opportunities for continued collaboration between both organizations. So phase 1, the objectives of phase 1 were to identify some strategies and institutional arrangements that would help to facilitate a better working, beneficial relationship between DOTs and railroads. It also included researching and developing, you know, some innovative partnering methods that would analyze the barriers that were between the two, as well as propose some ways of relieving some of those barriers. So as a result of the input from both DOTs and railroads, you know, we had some practices were identified, as well as the development of master agreements. And the second phase actually consisted of, seeking some stakeholders from both the railroad and the DOT communities that would serve on as a way to collaborate these efforts. Now, as a result, we had the community of interest that was developed, and that community of interest, and Tobin will talk more about this later, consisted of, we got 5 Class 1s involved, as well as, several DOTs were involved in that. So this was a forum where both DOTs and railroads were able to talk about some of the issues and kind of come up with some solutions to those issues, and we've been very successful. The emphasis during this phase was to seek out, DOT and railroad pairs that would help to move R16 forward by instituting and utilizing some of the innovations. The third phase actually provided the development of some training. So here you see some of the categories. Basically, it's broken out into two categories: best practice, as well as standardized agreement. We're looking for some institutional arrangements that would help to facilitate some innovative partnering techniques. So ultimately, we're seeking a way of building that mutual beneficial relationship between DOT and railroads. As the standardized agreements, we're looking at ways to help reduce the time for advancing projects for both DOT and railroads. So you have these tools that are broken up into 2 specific categories for a reason. So here are some of the examples. I'm not going to go over them because I think our panel is going to really hit these home for you. So I'm just going to touch upon a few. So we have, internal streamlining processes. So that's within the organizations, as well as trying to streamline some of the processes for working with each other between the DOTs and railroads. Single point of contact. This has proven to be really a real benefit, because if the DOTs or the railroads had an issue, they knew they had one person that they can contact to help resolve that issue. Dedicated railroad project managers. I know Washington DOT was very successful in utilizing that, using that innovation. Something as simple as just having meetings to help to facilitate that communication, whether they be annual, pre-construction, or post-construction. But those meetings would help to benefit both organizations. When we look at the 3 C's, and when we look at that, we're talking about that frequent communication, that frequent collaboration that will lead to that cooperation between both railroads and DOTs. Here are some more of those innovations. And as I mentioned, I'm not going to really touch on those. But I do want to talk about the agreements. We have standardized master agreements, or they could be standardized project agreements, as well as, partnering MOUs. And this is to help to lay out the foundation of how the DOT and the railroad would work together for implementing and moving forward with any projects. Now, for the most part, the biggest benefit to this initiative is expediting project delivery. Butch mentioned it in a general session that we had 6 of these that fall into this category, and this is one that can, he said it was a no-brainer, and I agree with him. And ultimately, when we're talking about improving communication, collaboration, and cooperation, we say that, but are we really doing that? So this initiative, R16, lays out some ways and a systematic approach on how to really improve that communication, keep it going. It's not just, that's it. This is something that needs to be worked at. And in doing that, it will lead to some streamlined processes. I think that because both organizations will now be looking at, how can we better serve our partner and try to figure out ways to reduce delays. Transparency. I think, for me, once you know, and everyone's on the same page, sometimes we're just speaking a different language, but we're trying to say the same thing. So that transparency through this initiative will help to lay out the foundation and kind of say, okay, this is what we're trying to do, and we got a better understanding of each of the organization's goals and what's important to them. So that helps. And at the end of the day, we want to get for both organizations, because no one wants to feel in a relationship or any type, business or private, that they have lost anything. So we want to get to that mutual beneficial relationship. But I can't talk about the benefits without mentioning, there's going to be some barriers. And some of our panel members will talk about, some of the barriers that they encountered and how they, went about resolving them. With any relationship, building any new relationship between organizations, or, you gotta get over the trust is one of those big. With this initiative, we've been able to show that, building that, using some of these innovations will get you there. And adequate communication. We've already said, if we can talk more and communicate better with this barrier or challenge. Constrained resources and rotating staff. Here we're looking at, both organizations are trying to do more with less. So they have, people that are leaving, retirement, but along with that retirement, you're losing that institutional knowledge, and that's on both parts. One thing with implementing this initiative, you help to support that continuity, because I guess you could talk about CSX. Tony Bellamy, he actually started at a lower level, but now he's moving up in the organization, and some of the things he's employing to have his staff do, some of the things that come out of this initiative. So he's continuing that continuity as he's moving up the chain, and he's passing it down. So as you lose people and lose that institutional knowledge, also we're keeping it going with this initiative. So with that said, talked about a lot. We'll have a panel discussion later about some of the support tools that are going to be part of this. Actually not going to be, they actually are part of this innovation.
Good morning. Good morning. All right. So I was just checking to see if we're all on the same page here. Joe has shared some perspective. It's a lot of work has gone into this project, and there's only so much time to share all of this. So he's tried to bring it all together into this little nutshell and give you some essential nuggets of this project. I'm going to give you some more additional information, but we want to get to the point where we can get the panel engaged, because that's where you're going to have the maximum benefit. But just to give you a perspective on what projects involving DOTs and railroads really mean, is that we have to step back and see what is the reality, right? So the reality is, as a nation, our bridges are aging. We've got 600,000 plus bridges, and about 24% of this are in some fashion needing attention, right? And so that's for sure. They require maintenance and preservation. Obviously, with MAP 21, we are all focusing our attention on what do we need to do to make sure that we take care of these structures. So that is another aspect. If we take a look at even a fraction of these projects, these bridges, structure, a small fraction of these, and we assume that they're going over or under the railroad track, that is a significant number of structures that we're going to be paying attention to, right? And if you look at, and I think FHW has a really good report on freight, and it talks about highway expansion, but it also talks about railroad expansion. And in that, it talks about the fact that we need to be expecting and prepared by 2030 that the railroads will have expanded significantly, far more than they've done in the past. So what does that mean? We are going to look at our aging infrastructure. We're going to be doing a lot more inspections and preservation activities on our structures. We're going to be interacting more. Railroads are expanding. And though DOTs are not, transportation agencies are not expanding the highway infrastructure, we are doing it, though in a little bit slower pace. So that's the reality. So the reality is that this relationship that we have between the DOTs and the railroads is going to continue and get further enhanced. So this is an important collaboration. So I just wanted to give you a perspective on that. When we started the project in 2008, and we talked to both sides, we talked to all of the DOTs, we talked to all of the railroads, we did a survey of the local agencies, and one of the things that people brought our attention to is things are going south, which means things aren't really where they need to be. And it was from both sides, DOTs and the railroads. Now, and Joe has given you a perspective on the different things that have happened since then. Now we look at the point where we are, and we feel, yes, we've made significant progress, okay? So why have we made significant progress? We are collaborating. Have we solved all the problems? No. Are we going to solve all the problems? No. But we are collaborating, right? We're doing things together. When we talk about the community of interest, and I know Joe touched upon it, but let me take a moment to talk about the community of interest. The community of interest is really bringing together stakeholders from the DOTs and the railroads together and saying, let's sit down together, let's partner, and let's find solutions. Let's think out of the box. We all have challenges. We know for sure the reality is transportation agencies are public organizations. We have a different perspective when we work on projects, right? Because we constantly feel obligated to do the right things to the taxpayers. So it's a very different model. When we look at the private organization, as the railroads are, they have a different perspective. Would any of us invest in a company that is not doing well as shareholders? No, we wouldn't. We would pull out our money in a rush, right? So that's an important perspective to bring to bear. And so which is that the railroads, they are great public stewards. And we say that because they've been involved in the project with us since 2008. We've had the 4 Class 1 railroads, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But they really want to make a difference without impacting those obligations that they have to their private stakeholders or to their consumers. Because if there is cost that they incur that they cannot recover, it has to either affect the shareholdings or it affects the price of the product. But so what it is that this common understanding helps us when we sit down together and partner. And that's what the R16 project did. It created this sense of collaboration and trust. And so we look at this time and we say this is a great window of opportunity. I want to take a moment to step back and say, in 2008, when we started the project, we had Monica Starnes was a program officer for this particular project. She was very passionate about it, and we had DOTs and railroads, and we had FHW and FRA actively engaged in the project. We started off with FHW, and we had Steve Gay, who was involved in the project, even though he was not directly working with highway operations. And then now we have Neil Peterson from TRB really bringing this project together and trying to take it to the next level because they see that this collaboration has come together. But overall, so we have a lot of people who are trying to come together and say, let's take this collaborative environment to the next level. So as you see, we have railroads collaborating with DOTs in the project. Railroads are extending their hand in partnership, right? Both parties, both the DOTs, and you will see in the project best practices, both the DOTs and the railroads are willing and ready to streamline activities, streamline processes, because there are redundancies, there are duplications, there are gaps in how we do things, and they're ready to partner on that. When you look at, Joe talked about I don't think this works. Okay, but the agreements. What is the whole thing about agreements? We do spend a lot of time between the DOTs and the railroads developing agreements, right? And streamlining these agreements in such a way that you can take all the common provisions and put it into some kind of a format, and the railroads call it differently. Some railroads call it templates, master templates. Some railroads call it developmental specifications, and some call it master agreements. There are different terminologies, the concept is the same. We take all these provisions that everybody has to constantly review and say, these are common, let's put it aside, now let's focus on the little things that can make a difference. And if you look at this chart here, and what the chart is showing you is that BNSF, CSX, NS, Union Pacific are manage 93% of the rail freight in the nation. We have all four of them and Genesee and Wyoming, which is the largest short line railroad on our community of interest. And they're actively engaged in the project, for one, and not only, when I say engaged, we have the railroads inviting us to come to various sessions, whether it is ARIMA or any other forum, to come and share this opportunity for collaboration and the opportunity to make a difference. So this is the right window of opportunity. My pointer doesn't quite work, but if you look at to the far right, we call them innovators. What are we talking about here? This project has brought together successes. These are isolated successes across the country between DOTs and railroads, and some within a DOT. So we have these isolated pockets of excellence. What we are trying to do with this is to move those isolated pockets to the tipping point. You're all familiar with this adoption model, which is if you can take an innovation to a particular point, about 15% or so, and it varies, to the tipping point, it'll then become routine practice and take off on its own. So if you're familiar, you'll remember the UGG story where the shoes were almost going to get closed down, and then a whole bunch of college students wore it. It became popular, and now you know how much you pay for an UGG shoe. So the idea behind this is very much the same, which is we have 11 DOTs, which is to say 8 state DOTs, Washington, Illinois, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, Michigan, Iowa, and Texas. And we have Manitoba Infrastructure and Transportation, which is a Canadian state agency, also in this community. So we have FHW and FRA on the panel. So we have these 11 DOTs and 5 railroads actively engaged in this project, and we think we have enough traction to move it from that innovator's point to the tipping point, right? And what this community of interest does, 2 things. It's not just about taking what we have successes and moving to the tipping point. It is also about that environment where we can sit collaboratively and have a discussion out of the box and come up with solutions, because we're constantly going to have new issues that we're going to be addressing. And so that the environment is there not to just take over and move the practices of the past forward, but also to identify new practices. FHWA has already engaged in round 2 of state implementation, where 7 states have been provided assistance. At the very end of our presentation and panel discussion, Joe will share more information about you. But the point is, things are moving forward. We're trying to take it to that tipping point. One of the points that was raised when we went about in our research phase was that some of the DOTs said, personnel who are working, so we really don't have, our transportation agencies are so highway focused. That is a fact, We have a lot of things in every DOT that we deal with with highways. And so we really don't have leadership support. Our leadership is so busy because there's so much going on in the highway segment that I don't think that they have the kind of attention we need for them to provide support for the railroad projects. And what we're here to say is, well, if that was the case, it is not so anymore. Because if you look at the screen here, we have Kirk Stoodle, the director of Michigan DOT. We have Secretary Prasad from Florida DOT. We have Carlos Braceres, the executive director of Utah DOT. They're all engaged in the project in different ways. And if this discussion has to be taken to another level, they will be engaged. They're available to take it to the next level and provide the appropriate leadership. Besides the fact that we have FHWA actively engaged in this Everyday Counts initiative to move it forward, and we have FRA who's been on this project from the very beginning. We've had Ron Rees and Frank Frey on the project from the start of the project, actively engaged in doing one of the things that is very important to the railroad, which is safety, addressing safety. So, on the same way, we also have railroad champions on the team. We started off, I think Joe was talking about the fact that when we started off the project, we had a tier of personnel working on the project. And so we had actually Chuck Gulluckson from CSX, Lynn Hartley from BNSF, Steve Gross-Rody from Union Pacific, and we had Dave Wyatt from NS working on it. And we had Larry Romaine, who was now part of Rail America, now part of Genesee and Wyoming on the project. And what has happened over the course of the project is these people who were working with us from the railroads and initially have moved further up in the leadership chain. And so now we have additional personnel working on the project with us. So what you see here on top is Tony Bellamy, who's the Director of Public Projects for CSX, and he has been actively engaged in the project. In many of the best practices that we have on the project, he has asked, he has got his entire public projects management team to move forward with implementing as many of these initiatives as they can in the states that they work in. And the lower side, I have David Wyatt, who was the former senior systems engineer from Norfolk Southern. He just retired. And we have now Thomas Bracey, who's taken over from Dave Wyatt, actively engaged in the project. And as you can see, we have Dan Parker here from NS, who's one of the public projects managers, engaged. At the last session in Kentucky, we had CSX public projects manager Amanda involved. So we have champions. The point I'm making is, maybe we did not have champions before from the DOT leadership or from the railroad. Now we do. So that's the big picture. I want to take a few minutes here to explain some of the successes, because we don't have time to go through all of the successes, and you'll have an opportunity to hear more about it from the panel. So for instance, sometimes when we think about innovations, we think about big things. Sometimes small things done multiple times can add up to a lot, right? So this is an example from Florida DOT, and the agency was having a lot of challenges addressing flagging, because flaggers are union staff, and it's very difficult to get union staff trained in flagging activities at short notice. And so between CSX and Florida DOT, they were having these challenges, and it's a very interesting example because what it showed is that there was a communication issue. So when a DOT says we want X number of flaggers for the next 6 months, that has one kind of perspective. Well, you say that I need so many number of flaggers for the next 2 years because I have all these projects going on board. It makes it a little easier for the railroad to go and engage and train people, because they have to train these personnel to do these specific activities. So one such opportunity was there between CSX and Florida DOT, and now they have not just a flagging agreement, they have a very effective flagging tracking process where they look at the flagging requirements ahead, they plan it, CSX and Florida DOT plans it, and then they actually have a tracking of it by the month, by the week for their projects. And it helps the DOT look at all the projects across the districts and figure out we have these many resources, how would we effectively deploy them? And the agency says, on a conservative side, they have at least $200,000 that they save annually, and many more. Washington DOT has similar best practices. So there are best practices on the simple aspects of flagging, just streamlining. The other one I'm talking about is what is called the Master Developmental Agreement, and different DOTs have different railroad and DOTs call it differently. The example I'm citing here is between Iowa DOT and Union Pacific, and so they've taken all the common provisions and put it into what they're calling a developmental specification, and then project-specific information then becomes a 2-page or 3-page template. It did take the agency a while to get this together because there's a lot of details to work with. There is also this whole idea of building trust, and then once you build trust and you have something in place, it's a little bit easier to move it forward, but they've had great success on this, and they have been able to reduce the time it takes for an agreement to have. It takes even significantly less than that. This is on the conservative end. So if you have a lot of projects and you're shaving off half or 3/4 of the time that is required on an agreement, you can just get an understanding of the kind of savings you would have. The next one is Master Right of Entry Agreement. Just by streamlining activities, putting agreements in place, agencies have been able to reduce the time from 10 days to a month. Formal escalation process, Joe touched upon this. When we talk about formal escalation process, you know, the general perception we have is, well, I know the person that I need to be talking to if there's a problem, you know, and I can just talk to them, and then, you know, if it's another problem, if it's not resolved, then we'll figure a way to move up. Really, and this is an example from Washington DOT, they had a lot of projects in 2006 that they had to bring together, and so they said, okay, we need to make sure that issues get resolved expeditiously. And they came up with a process where between Washington DOT and BNSF, so they have a tiered approach. At the first level, the routine activities, the public projects manager and the manager in Washington DOT will look at and try to get resolution. If not, it'll go up to the next tier, both organizations, and keeps going up. What it does is twofold. It streamlines your escalation process, because when you're going to put something formally in place, the first thing you're going to say, well, let's look at what it is today, right? What do we have to shave off here? Is this process that we need really streamlined? Do we need to change something? And so they streamlined the activity. That was the first thing. The second thing that they did is that they looked at roles and responsibilities. What is the authority? Why are issues getting resolved moving up the chain? It is not because a person at the first tier is ineffective. It's because they may not have the authority to authorize use of certain resources. You know, everybody has certain limitations on what they can authorize. So there are multiple things that go into the escalation process. So they were able to put that together, and they came up with a formal escalation process. And this is in fact, I think they reduced the number of issues that got escalated from 15% to 0.0 something or the other, and I put it 1%. They've not had to use it for the longest time, except last month. And they said that was a great thing that we had a formal escalation process in place, because there was a major acquisition or a lot of resources needed to be pulled together or committed to, and the personnel at the first tier looking at it didn't have the authority to approve it. So it got up the chain, and the appropriate personnel from the DOT and the railroad met, hashed it out, and the issue was resolved. So there's multiple aspects to having this process in place. Similarly, they have a partnering memorandum of understanding, and you'll hear examples of this from the panel today. But the Washington DOT memorandum of understanding is not a legally binding document, but it lists down a lot of the things that the two partners would sit down together, expediting, how are they going to coordinate, a whole host of things. But it really brings the parties together to discuss and sort of formalize how are we going to do these activities, right? They also streamline the agreement process as a part of this activity and reduce the time to about 31 weeks. So, you know, things can take years to get done, but they streamlined in such a fashion that every step of the workflow is sort of known. So you know two things. One is, you know that you don't have to wait for something to come to you when you know it's only going to come 3 weeks later. But you know it's going to come 3 weeks later. So you forget about it for the first 2 weeks and you think about it in the third week. It's a very effective way of managing your resources, because you're not going to invest time on the activity till when you know when to expect it. And then the fact that there's a workflow and it's going to go through the chain, right? So great, and they had one thing that Washington DOT did, which is unique, is for their big program of projects, they hired or they paid BNSF to have a position in BNSF dedicated to the Washington DOT projects. So this public projects manager in Washington DOT would coordinate all the activities between the DOT and the railroad and made sure that the project was kept on scope, on schedule, and on budget. So if you think about if your projects are going off schedule and the amount of monies it costs to bring it up to pace, you'll appreciate that paying for a resource is sometimes well worth it. It depends on the situation, and you have to figure what works best for you. The last but one is the grade crossing best practice. What this is about is that, and you'll hear probably a lot more today, the grade crossing safety is a big activity or project in the minds of everybody. I know many of the DOTs, Utah is going towards zero death, towards zero fatalities. So we are all looking at focusing on that. So grade crossing projects are a big area of attention for DOTs and railroads and for the federal agencies. And what Iowa DOT did is that they streamlined their activity in such a way that, and if you need additional information, I can give you on that. But they have a method, day 1, day 2, day 3. This is what the DOT is going to do. This is what the railroad is going to do, so on and so forth. But as a precursor to that, they worked on materials so that they have the best quality material. They know exactly when am I going to have an asphalt, when am I going to have, what is the different types of crossings I'm going to have, and what is the circumstances under which I'm going to put it. And so they started out with the intent of improving the life of their project with the expectation that maybe we'll extend it to 3 years, 4 years. And now the oldest project that they have is 13 years old. And doing well does not require work. It means multiple things. You have great quality products. You do not interrupt traffic, either pedestrian or rail traffic, minimizing inconvenience to the public. So that's another example. The last example I have here is on routine project improvement. And there are a whole host of things. Each DOT in their collaboration with the railroad will have different challenges. And so the idea is to look at that specific challenge and streamline the process to meet that particular situation, because it'll be a little bit different. In this particular case, this is a Texas DOT example. Texas has about 100 agreements or so with Union Pacific. And the methodology they had is that every time an agreement had to be processed, it would go up the chain from the divisional office or the regional public project manager to the central office, to their Omaha office. And so the agency and the railroad sat down together and said, what can we do? And obviously what it does is that the 25% of the projects that really need attention also gets locked in this pipeline. So everything takes a lot of time. They streamlined their activity, and this is just one innovation, there are many others, and they figured out what are the projects that are routine projects that do not need to go up the chain, and then could we get authority to the public projects manager to approve those. So what it did is it took out 75% of the projects, and so all that had to move up the chain was 25%, expediting those projects because now resources were freed up to go and work on those projects. So these are just some examples of agreements. What I want to take a moment here, if I can, is to show you, I think Joe talked about this. So obviously both DOTs and railroads are losing personnel, right, for retirement and various other reasons. So one of the things that TRB or SHRP2, our SHRP2 project management team wanted us to do is to see if we could take the information that we have and bring it together in a fashion so that it could be made available a little bit more permanently. And so what we did is that, what I'm showing you is the live product, and I know what the users are viewing out is a screen capture of the same tool. We brought all of this information into an application. It's a web tool, and what I wanted is, so this is the web product here, and let me see if it'll, so that's, okay. And if you see here, if you come to the home page, I'm on the home page here, you will see that I'm going to play this just for a second here, and you're not going to hear the voice, but you're going to see what this involves. Is that, so this is the application, and the part that I want to show you here is that who you see here on the right is Paul Worley, who's the director of rail for the North Carolina DOT. On your left is Cami Young. She is the BNSF Public Projects Manager. So what we have here is real collaboration. We have the DOT and the railroad sitting together and explaining. They've both been engaged in the project from the very beginning, and they're talking about how we can make this collaborative environment work, so successes. And all through this tool suite, you will find similar collaborations. We have a lot of information from all of our railroads. We have NSS contributed a lot of information. We have CSX contributing a lot of information. So really, the point I'm making again is collaboration is a reality now if we want to take advantage of it. Quickly, I'm not going to go through a lot of it. What we've done is that we have created 6 major lessons, and under each lesson there are many subtopics. And you will see the first one, which is a primer for executives. We have Secretary Prasad from Florida DOT sharing his perspective on the importance of this partnering between the DOTs and the railroads. And we have Kirk Stoodle from Michigan DOT. He has provided several quotes on what he thinks this project can move forward with. So we have several lessons there. If you look at the library, in the library we have, and I'm not going to go through a lot, you can see here that we have populated the library with a lot of information. And if you hover over any of these tags, you will see the number of resources in that particular tag. So you can go select any one of these tags, and it'll take you, and I'm trying to think of one that I can bring up here. And you can see any material that is in this document. We have resources from both DOTs and railroads here. We have NSS document, we have CSX document, we have information from all different kinds of resources we have pulled together into this application to make it available to you. The idea behind this again is that, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because I want to make sure that you get the opportunity to look at it. This is one of the documents in it, and I'm sure Dan's going to talk about it. It's a 176-page document, which is a public projects manual from NS, and it has a wealth of knowledge, and it's an updated document. You'll get an opportunity to see that and hear about it. What we want to show is that this is the application, and it has been developed in such a fashion that it will adapt to your device. So if you are on an iPhone, it's going to adapt to your device. If you are looking at a computer, it's going to be, like you saw, it was a 2-column format. It's migrated to, it's changed format to make it conducive to your use. The idea behind that is we do not, the community, when I say we, I'm talking about the whole community of interest of the DOTs, the railroads, and the federal agencies, want our user base to focus on finding solutions. We don't want you to spend your time going and Googling information and getting it. We want to keep this updated, and there are a lot of mechanisms in place where we can keep that information updated so that when you find a good practice that you want to share with your peers, we can put it there. Similarly, if you want to use a resource that is there, you will have the opportunity. And by the same token, if you're facing a challenge and we want to find a solution for that, and we find a solution, we want to put it there. Big picture, I want to make sure that I'm running out of time here. Big picture, I'm just going to take a minute here, is that there are different methodologies for how you could go forward and implement your solution. The idea is there are a lot of challenges, right? And so an approach to follow when you're doing this, irrespective of whether you're going for round 5 or in your own forum, we just shared this methodology, is once you've done your problem identification, select few issues for resolution, because there are a lot of issues. You might choose the big one, which is an agreement, or you might choose a small one, which is a flagging, streamlining activity. You might choose something differently depending on what you want to do. And if there are web lessons available that talk to that topic, you can look at it and see what have other people done. And then hopefully you'll have a facilitated workshop where we'll hash these issues in a collaborative and out-of-the-box thinking environment where, if required, you will have a DOT peer who has already successfully implemented that, or you might have a DOT in a railroad in another state that have implemented that solution that can come to the forum and we can have this collaborative discussion. We're sort of taking the community of interest model and seeing how we can resolve issues all across the country. That's an opportunity for you. And then once you come up with the solution, the point is come up with an implementation plan, put dates and times on it so you know you're going to achieve certain things and you're going to be focused on it, and then monitor it. And if you're done, then you can go and pick up the next list of issues. So that's sort of a methodology that you want to deploy. I want to close my slides, and I don't know if you had questions from me. I didn't see any hands raised. So as I said, especially as we're going through the panel discussion, if you have any questions, raise your hand so that we can answer it as we go along. I want to close Joe and my presentation by bringing this to the front, which is, you know, we have the DOTs and the railroads engaged. Everybody's prepared in a collaborative mode to make things move forward nationally, because we know in the coming years, the challenges on DOT railroad projects are going to increase just by virtue of the work that we're going to be doing, right? We have successful examples. If there are not successful examples, we have a forum, a collaborative forum where we can think about it collaboratively, discuss it, hash it out, and come up with solutions. So we do have an unprecedented opportunity. This is the first time, I believe, in our history, DOT railroad collaboration, that we have this great opportunity of conducive collaboration and partnering. So we want to take advantage of it and make many of these practices common practice so that it becomes routine to all of in day-to-day operations. With that, what I want to do is really get to the panel discussion, which is the heart of this conversation. I'm going to, Joe already introduced our panel, but I want to take an opportunity to ask each of our panel members to say something about themselves, which will shed some light on the kind of activities they're involved with. With that, I'm going to go first to Brad and have Brad, you can give them that. They can use it till they're done. Keep two there. Yeah.
As it says up there, I'm the engineer of design from Michigan.
Good?
I got to get very close to it. How's that?
It's good.
It's good? All right. My title up there says the engineer of design, which means I'm the design division administrator for Michigan DOT. That's design of highway infrastructure, roadways, bridges, and whatnot. I am not MDOT's Office of Rail Director. This was a little bit foreign to me when I was asked to participate on the community of interest, but I think what I bring is that highway project development perspective to the team and talking about how we actually work with folks on a project level. It has been as much educational for me as it probably has been hopefully informational for everybody else.
And I'm Daniel Parker, Norfolk Southern. I work for the Maintenance Way, Bridges and Structures Department in a subgroup called Public Improvements. My job is the engineer of public improvements for the states of Tennessee, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, and Missouri. What that means is I have about a little over 300 projects running at any time in different phases, from design, from concept, all the way to coming up to on completion. Some of them completing now, and from various in size. So from small dollar projects to the multi-million, into the hundreds of millions of dollars. And what I do is I facilitate projects for outside entities. So in order to keep the railroad's operations moving forward and keep somebody else's project, construction project, or moving around us. So I'm basically a project manager for that situation right there.
Francisco.
Yeah, my name is Francesco Bedini. I work for the Bureau of Railroads in the Illinois Department of Transportation. I handle one project. It's the Chicago to St. Louis high-speed rail improvement, which is between $1.5 and $2 billion of capital expenditures, and we've been assisted by the FRA with our $1 billion grant in 2009, and the state has provided some additional funds throughout the years. This project started and I'll go into the details later, but we started in 2010. We are in a fourth construction season, and my job is to essentially coordinate and meetings with the host railroad, which is in this case is Union Pacific, the local agencies, the Illinois Commerce Commission represented here by Mike Stead. When we have to deal with all the grade crossings we have 252 of those. And I also have to go and talk to the local communities to assist in their needs, what they would like to see out of the project, and also try to share with them all the benefits that this project is going to bring to the state of Illinois. That's my role, but then we will go into further details later.
Mike.
Good morning. I'm Mike Stead. I'm manager of the Rail Safety Section for the Illinois Commerce Commission. So I'm not a highway person, but I have worked for IDOT in the past. I've been in the railroad industry, either working for a railroad or with railroads for 34 years, so I think I have a fairly good idea of what the relationship is between highway departments, state government, and the railroad industry.
Okay, thank you. So with that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pose some questions. Remember, as we go through the conversation, if you have questions that you want the panel, this is an expert panel with a lot of experience, covering some of your territories, so feel free to ask. So I want to start off, shall I start off with you, Brad, and ask you to give some big picture perspective or overview or outline of some of the things that Michigan DOT is involved in on projects with the railroads. I know you work with 4, do you want to give that? We can move that around. Yeah, you can.
Sure. In Michigan, we have about 3,600 miles of track. We deal with 29 different operators across the state. 665 miles of state-owned track. About 20% of our state's freight tonnage is carried by our rail system, and we have 3 intercity passenger routes, carry about 800,000 passengers a year. Our biggest initiatives right now are focused obviously on increasing speed and capacity, as well as some of the other efficiency things that we can put on the lines to accommodate both passenger and freight. Our biggest initiative is the accelerated rail project that we have going on. Included the acquisition of about 135 miles of line between Dearborn and Kalamazoo and central lower Michigan between the Detroit and Chicago lines. And that's kind of where our efforts are focused right now on getting those things up to speed for the passengers, while obviously trying to accommodate and certainly preserve the efficiency of the freight movements.
Thank you. Do you want to give a big picture of some of the things activities that your area is involved with, projects you're involved, states you're involved?
I guess kind of for a big picture idea of what we do. Francesco kind of touched on a lot of some of the things that that we do as well, and that's really just it's a mass coordination for a lot of these projects. It's establishing that communication. From, like I said, from the small dollar projects, from maybe a small addition to a crossing, to a 3-tier bridge project, in the heart of a city, and big picture wise, it really it's for what we do, it really comes down to communication and just getting everybody on board, understanding expectations, understanding timelines. That's something for the big picture we try to get out there early on and to facilitate these projects.
You also work with 22 states, and you have a lot of public projects personally that you're involved with. Can you highlight some of that?
Some of my personal projects.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that you have like 300 plus projects that you're working with.
I can tell you from experience, as somebody put it to me this week, they kind of said it best. A big project will have big challenges, but it also has big support. So, if you see a problem up front, you can see it can cost a lot of money, but you can get a lot of people on top of it real quick. A lot of everyone being very responsive in that aspect. But then it's the small projects. Small projects, big challenges, and those are the ones that you end up having to spend a lot of your time working with, and just a simple overhead bridge somewhere, but over a busy line, where you can't get track time, where the contractor can't get in there to set the beams, and just having to find innovative ideas to facilitate that project and keep our operations moving.
Right. Can you give a big picture of, because you have a lot of projects going on, including the CREATE project and multiple other projects going on. Can you highlight some of the big picture projects and where they are? What does it mean for a user base like this? How would they relate to the kind of activities that you are having in the DOT?
Absolutely. So, as you said, we have in our state we have about 7,000 miles of track, and there are 3 passenger corridors. So going out to Chicago, we got the Chicago to St. Louis, which is the one where all the eyes are on top now because of all the improvements. But then we're also managing the Chicago to the Quad Cities. We are working with Union Pacific to reactivate the passenger service between Chicago and Rockford, and then eventually expand it to Dubuque. And the 4th corridor is the Chicago to Carbondale, where we offer the standard the Illini and Saluki passenger service from north to south. The 2 really big projects are the Chicago to St. Louis high-speed rail, which I'm managing, and the other one is the CREATE program, which is essentially a way to assist in decongesting the freight traffic that goes from one end to another end of Chicago, and also to mitigate the heavy delays that are experienced by intercity passenger trains. It takes about 24 to 72 hours for a freight car to go from one end to another end of Chicago, and the purpose of this program is to try to accelerate that. I can tell that last week we completed and is now in service the Englewood flyover, which essentially is grade separating the Norfolk Southern Railroad, and the Metro Rock Island, and it's eliminating 30 to 45 minutes at least on average of delays of both Metro and Amtrak, and also the NS freights. So that's one huge accomplishment. We have. Of the 70 overall projects, we have completed about 20. We got 4 under advanced studies, preliminary engineering, and another 20 that we still have to do. We work with essentially every Class 1 railroad in the country, including Amtrak, including Canadian Pacific, that has an end in Chicago. So this is the big picture of what our Bureau of Railroads is working with in the state of Illinois. And also we are looking at a study, the Chicago to Detroit, so we are working with you guys as well to actually, and now we're starting a collaboration together to actually try to find out the best common alternative to get out to Chicago until where they go to Detroit and we go down to St. Louis. So this is the
magnitude. So really it shows the magnitude of the project they're working with. Not only is Illinois DOT working with the 7 Class 1 railroads, they're also having to collaborate with a lot of the states because they have this big project going on with Michigan, including Michigan, and a lot of money, because many of these projects that I think with the ARA money is going to be closed out in 2017. So just the magnitude of the project and all of the best practices that need to be in place to push this program of billion plus and projects on board is extensive. And we'll come back to that, and I want to touch upon some of the successes and challenges in a bit. But let me ask Mike, you obviously cover an aspect of projects that's like at the heart of most of the DOTs and the railroads, which is safety. And so share with us some of the big initiatives that you have going on.
Sure. Illinois is the rail hub of North America. All 7 Class 1 freight railroads operate in Illinois. We have over 7,000 miles of track, route miles of track in the state. It's the second most of any state in the country. We have the second most number of public highway rail grade crossings, over 12,000. We have the third largest highway network, so the opportunity for incidents to occur at the rail highway intersections is very great in Illinois. Not something to be proud of, but something we've been working on for many years. And what we bring to the table, quite honestly, is technical expertise and money. Illinois is one of the few states in the country that has its own state-funded rail safety improvement program. Currently, we receive $39 million a year that we can use for public safety improvements at crossings. And we're using that money to assist IDOT with the high-speed rail project, along with other improvements. And we've been a leader in the industry, both statewide and nationally, with improvements to grade crossings. We have led the area, this region anyway. I don't want to say the country, but the region, with the installation of fork water gates with vehicle presence detection, the installation of pedestrian gates. The corral type system, not just a gate, but a fencing, and the whole system is currently being developed. Right now we have, for instance, with quad gates, there are 80 installations in the state, and by the end of 2017, that'll be up to 200. Pedestrian gates now we're about 6, and by that same period we'll be about 60. And we're also looking at over 300 locations where grade crossing signal systems and highway intersections signal systems are interconnected, and that number is growing as we speak. So what we bring, as I mentioned, is technical expertise and the ability to help local communities and the railroads to invest in these safety improvements.
And if I recall correctly, one of the things that I found different with what you are all doing is that they actually put $39 million of state funds focused on safety projects, which is, I think, a little bit of a different model. Over and above the 130 funds, you put a lot of money into addressing safety. So that's a little bit different, right?
Right. I mean, just a big picture, since the Grade Crossing Protection Fund, this is the funding source that the state created back in 1955. Since 1955, over $700 million state money has been invested in crossing improvements. What that has led to is significant decrease in the number of collisions and the number of fatalities at grade crossings. The high of 827 collisions in 1977. Last year we had 126. So the number is certainly in the right direction, but nowhere near where we want to be. Yeah. But I guess the point is we're spending a lot of money investing in public safety improvements, making headway in where we want to go, but the cost or the investment is certainly is not the answer. We're still seeing problems out there.
Okay. Let me ask Brad. So one of the things that, one of the best practices that we have is about partnering and collaboration and all of that. And I know that Michigan DOT has been very successful in partnering agreements that you've had with other communities. So talk about that and give us a sense of, I know that Kirk Stoodle, the director, has been involved in the project from the very beginning. You came on board in 2010, and about a different perspective. Share some of your thoughts as well as your perspective on engagement in this R16 project and the partnering aspects of it.
Sure, we have so a few different partnering efforts that we go through with our other industries that I think could translate very well to the rail folks as well. We have a group called the Michigan Infrastructure and Transportation Association. That's our road builders. That's our contracting organization that we've sat down with them and walked through really what are the ground rules for how we work together and formalize those things, formalize process, formalize committees, formalized dispute resolution type processes that we could implement so that we can really effectively work with them. We've done the same thing with our ACEC organization, the consulting engineers in the state. Same type of thing. We all sat around the table and talked about what are the things that, from a process standpoint, that we can do so that we can spend our time effectively and not just keep going back and forth. We actually have the structure in place so that we can deal with issues. We just recently started holding annual rail meetings in the state, and I think that may be a step in that direction with those folks. We have a good relationship with our Michigan Railroad Association, which is obviously the industry partner that we would work with in the state, but as well as bringing in the other rail providers. So I'm hopeful, and again, I'm not in the Office of Rail, but I think that model could translate well into working with the rail folks.
Thank you. Dan, could you share, obviously, Dave Wyatt and Ennis have been involved in the project from the very beginning, from 2008 on the project. Can you talk about your engagement, Ennis's engagement, and also the fact that you've all contributed a lot to the tool suite that we have? Can you share your perspective on engagement with the R16
Sure.
project and partnering?
When it comes to a collaboration, some kind of collaborative project like this, we love to get involved. And the reason being, it makes our lives easier. I mean, if not for the right reasons, then for the selfish ones. Get that information out there and make it easy for everybody. Make it easy for you to talk to me. More than likely, if it's one of the states I covered, I'm the guy you'll be talking to. And so, in that aspect, I think that Dave White immediately jumped in on this in 2008 and got us all involved, all the project managers, the engineering public improvements, for all the different states, for all the 22 states that Norfolk Southern covers. And in some point, we've all jumped in and done the review process, part of this R16. And it's all going in the right direction. He was talking about agreements a few minutes ago. We love the word, with the DOTs, we love them talking about master agreements. That's where we want to go. In some states right now, they're approaching us with it. And, the reason being is if you've never done a project with us before and you send us an agreement, well, it's got to be reviewed. Well, and that's okay, you got to review that. But if you've changed a lot of the verbiage from previous agreements, it's going to go to legal, okay? Our legal department's going to get it, your legal department's going to get it, and they're going to go back and forth for a while before you get back to the engineering. And if you have a project with timelines, we're going to blow this time, together we will all blow those timelines out of the water, okay? So master agreements are a good thing. They are very much encouraged. We do have, some resources here. She was talking about that we've given up the Public Projects Manual for Norfolk Southern. CSX has one, BNSF has one. This will take you through what to expect with a project when dealing with us on a project, and the kind of agreements you'll see, and just some of the verbiage you can expect to see. That's worked in the past for everybody. So, it's not the exact agreement. Of course, the agreement will always be a little bit different because of the plans, but this will give you a great idea on what to expect. And of course, the timelines. Talking about best practices. You want it to streamline a project. You really want to, when the DOT is working with them, we're getting better at it all the time. But but to understand each other's timelines and how to get a project from concept to completion within 52 weeks or whatever it is. And that's just something that this system that we're working with today, getting this kind of information out there will be extremely helpful and save a lot of heartache for people that are going to be working with the DOTs and railroads.
Good. That's good. Can you talk now about, obviously we're talking a little bit of a streamlined best practices and so on and so forth. With the major projects that you have on board and all the people that you're working with and the players, what are some of your agreement processing methodology? What are some of the best practices you have to put in place in order to make sure that your projects are on track to meet the appropriate deadline? And obviously we want it to be on scope and within cost, right? So share your perspective with us. If you have questions, please ask ask your panel members. Go ahead.
Okay, so I have to say I came on board on this project last year. So the project that I'm working on, the program started in 2010 when President Obama made the funding available to apply for high-speed rail projects. But I was brought up to speed, and I had to learn, and I essentially had to get a crash course on what has been done before. So everything that we do, there's a master agreement between us and the Union Pacific Railroad, by which they are doing the work to reconstruct the track, the sidings, and everything related to their right of way. And then we provide, we pay them through the money that was given to us from the Federal Railway Administration. This is to make the picture simple. But obviously the project is really complex. It's not only a matter of reconstructing the track, it's a matter of putting in new stations, it's a matter of putting in a new signaling and control system, it's a matter of getting new trains, and each of these aspects has to have an agreement in place. And normally in these agreements we know who the party is, what they are supposed to do, when do they have to deliver their piece of the work, and this is how we actually manage to keep the several activities moving, and we all monitor it through a master schedule that we update every month, and that's how we can make sure that we can deliver the overall project by 2017. And by the way, that is the date when the federal money that we got is going to expire. So we have that that guillotine on our on our necks, fast approaching.
The
as well.
timeline is here.
Yeah. So this is about the high-speed rail. The same is happening also with the several projects that are run through the CREATE program. This is coordinated. It's with the Association of American Railroads in this case, and there's a coordination with all the Class 1 railroad companies that are involved in the CREATE. There's the FHWA involved as well, when you have to grade separate a railroad from a highway. And if you need more details on this, I can get you some information from the group of people in our division that are actually working on the CREATE project.
So I know that I don't see a lot of hands raising, but I can see a lot of nods, and maybe I'll talk to you afterwards, looks from all of you. As you go through this process, if you have questions, feel free to ask, and if you have questions that you want to ask afterwards, the panel members will be here for you to ask your questions. And if there is some information that we are not able to share with you, we will get it to you after the session. Thank you. Go ahead, Mike. Share some of your the big activities that you're doing and your engagement.
Well, as I mentioned, we have a dedicated funding source, state funds. It's separate from the Section 130 program, which our Illinois DOT administers and uses for the same type of improvements, but the amount of money that we have available at the state level far exceeds what Section 130 provides IDOT. But collaboratively, we're working, assisting IDOT on the high-speed rail project to make sure that all the safety improvements are in place to permit 110-mile passenger rail operations in that corridor. Illinois, unfortunately, has a long history of major catastrophic rail highway incidents, and we want to make sure that it's collectively, the state of Illinois wants to make sure that we eliminate the opportunities for something like that to happen at a high-speed location. That's one of our primary projects right now, but on a daily basis, as I mentioned, we have over 12,000 public crossings in the state, so our overall rail safety improvement program looks at other ways to improve safety, including consolidation. We offer incentive payments from our fund to local agencies to voluntarily close crossings in a collaboration with IDOT and the industry. Communities can see a significant amount of money if they agree to close a crossing. The largest example I can give is the city of the city of Macomb. Back about 10 years ago, agreed to close a number of crossings, and through our incentive program and BNSF, they received over $1 million for closing half a dozen crossings. That's a significant amount of money. That's a significant improvement in public safety that the city engaged in. And we also do other things from a safety standpoint, installing flashing light signals and gates, helping the railroads improve their existing signal systems, remote monitoring systems, that type of thing. It's all based on the idea of trying to improve safety and reduce the number of times that a train vehicle collision may occur. And the largest thing that we're looking on now is trying to reduce trespassing incidents. And I think that's a national problem. In fact, I know it is. Certainly is a statewide problem, and I know the industry is concerned about that as well. So that's the largest focus that we have right now. We know that the number of collisions that occur every year in the state of Illinois have gone down the last 15 years, but the number of trespassing incidents have increased every year. So that's where we're trying to focus our immediate attention. It's not necessarily an easy fix. Certainly we can't, it's not possible to fence entire railroads right away from point A to point B. So what we're doing is, again, using the high-speed rail project as a model, trying to identify locations where pedestrian traffic it may be the greatest and try to improve safety at those locations.
Thank you. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
As Mike was saying about the crossing closures, I reached out. We have a separate group that we bring in whenever we're working on projects. That if we see a potential closure, we'll bring them in and work with the different states. And I asked them just for some input, what they thought. You know, if I could say something on behalf of them today, you know, what would they want me to say? And you know, basically, I assume most everybody in here is DOTs, government related.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Okay. For us to close crossings, you know, we adamantly rely on the state support. We rely on the state support during the public hearing process, for the attendance with us, you know, in relevant council meetings and work sessions. And, you know, we rely on support from the FHWA, you know, of course, the DOTs, to help make closures part of agreements for the grade separations. So generally, whenever, for what I do, you know, if you're going to grade separate something, it's good. We do, and there's a crossing close by. We ask that you close it. You know, it's kind of boxes us in. So if we're putting something in over us up top, maybe can you take this out right here? That helps everything. That's kind of the whole point of a grade separation. You know, it helps our operations move forward. It reduces the risk for the public. So anyway, that's always a great thing. And then when it comes to presenting them, closures, we need to make them look like a good, of course, what they are, a good thing for the community, not only the traveling public ways, but, you know, to show them that it's safely reducing their risk, and it's making things aesthetically pleasing, and it also offers all the way down to like noise reduction. So any help we can always get there is much appreciated.
I want to ask Brad a question. Any other follow-up thoughts before I ask Brad a slightly different question? One of the challenges that both DOTs and railroads had expressed to us is about the fact that obviously in DOTs we do have a lot of districts, right? We might have 3 or 4. Everybody's project is important to them, right? If I'm in a district, my project is important to me. If you're in another district, your project is important to you. So what happens is that one of the challenges that railroads had expressed is that, you know, if we have a lot of communication back and forth between us and the DOTs, you know, but we don't really know some of these people, so we get this barrage of information, and we don't know, is District A or one project more important than the other? So we sort of kept in this position of trying to figure out who do we not displease, right? So a best practice that came out of this a long time back is how do we streamline internal activities so that there is either a single point of contact, single point of first contact. So if you're interacting with a railroad, there's one person that you would make the initial contact, and then they would navigate the way. Michigan DOT has done something to streamline those kind of activities. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, a few years ago, we went through a reorganization. I'm sure like a lot of the DOTs, as our numbers go down, we got to kind of think about how our resources are stacked up. Back when I was a real designer, putting my own projects together, you know, I had to deal with rail folks from like 3 or 4 different parts of the department. You know, I had rail safety in one area. We had our grade crossing and structure engineers in another area. The freight and passenger folks were in another area. So even as an internal designer, I had many people that I had to go to try to get my questions answered and try to bring together. So through our reinvention, our reorganization, I think around 2010, we created an Office of Rail. So we actually have a separate office within the department. I think it really kind of elevates their position in the department by having their own area. But what it did was it took all of those different portions of the department that they all spoke the same language. They all spoke the railroad language, and it brought them together. I think it strengthened them as a group because they could count on each other for resources. But it was also a big deal for a person like me that was developing a project. Now I can just go to the Office of Rail. And I got to believe that for the rail providers, it was probably wonderful for them too, because they no longer had to hunt around the department like I did.
Can you talk about your internal streamlining that you have done when a project request comes, or whatever, or other internal streamlining of activities?
For just kind of take you from a project's initiation or concept. If you are a DOT, let's say that you are a county or a city or something like that, and you call one of the engineer public improvements, and you have a project in your state. The first thing we might ask you to do is sign a PE agreement, basically saying you're going to reimburse us for our cost for preliminary engineering. We'll talk to you about your project up front, but in order to get like a full review going, to see if this thing's really good to fruition, and to get all the departments involved, and to supply you with contacts very quickly. Basically we'll pull a consultant in real fast. That way you can talk to the specifics. You have somebody talk to you real quick. Due to the amount of projects each one of us has, like I said, over 300 projects, it's a lot of phone calls anyway. So if I can get a consultant in, the faster I can do that, it helps you out to keep your project moving. But the first thing to do is get that PE agreement in place. Now, if you're a DOT, it's a little different. Generally, we have established relationships with the DOTs. They can call and say, "Hey, Daniel, I have a PO issued. Go ahead and go. You're clear to go ahead and incur engineering costs. Go ahead and start this project." And that's generally the first thing we do. The first thing we ask for, and just to make sure our costs are gonna be reimbursed up front, because we can't pay for everybody else's projects. That's the whole reason. But then once that happens, we have our processes in place. We have a sequence of handling for projects, and what that entails is basically the scope of work, who's going to be reimbursed for the project, and then we send that to all of our internal departments that are going to be affected by this, from the grade crossing guys, grade crossing safety, to director of industrial developments, like any kind of new business, strategic planning, those kinds of things, and then all the comments have to come back in. Once that way we can see what kind of problems this project's going to run into, what kind of challenges, I guess the best way to say it, this project could potentially run into. And a lot of times the guys say, we have no issues, go ahead and go forward. And so, and that will really kick off the review process, really keep getting, drilling down into specifics of the engineering behind the project, all the way up until you get to the construction agreement. And that's where you want to be for us to say this. Once those signatures are in, you have a project on that construction agreement.
Would you share with us the Illinois DOTs? You have a rail office, you have freight pass, you have so much activity going on. What is it? You have done a lot of internal streamlining to make that effective. Can you share that perspective, please?
Well, as you correctly said, we have a division. It's one of the 4 divisions of IDOT. It's called Public Intermodal Transportation. Under that umbrella, we have the public transit, which is responsible for the bus services for the CTA up in Chicago, for example, or for the bus services in the cities of downstate. And then we have a group of railroads, which is divided into freight. Under freight, we have the CREATE. So that section is responsible of assisting with maybe a customer who needs to have a rail spur to go from the main line to his high grain elevator. Then we have a passenger section under which I work, and to be able to do what we're doing on the Chicago to St. Louis, this is something that didn't exist before. I mean, until 2009, our Bureau of Railroads was essentially assisting in like fixing up crossings, or maybe we installed 4-quadrant gates, I think in 2002, to test an increase of the speed from 79 miles per hour to 90. But then when we got the money from Washington, D.C. to go and rebuild the track and to allow operations to 110 miles per hour,
The magnitude of coordination
we
went
needed to
up.
go and talk not only to the Division of Highways, but we had to go to talk at each of the districts where this line is going through, and a few of the crossings that we're fixing up. We have 252 crossings on this line. Are not a simple fix where we install the 4-quadrant gates, we put the loop detector and the new signal and end of story. There are some crossings where we have to redesign the approach. The communities have asked to maybe extend a pedestrian crossing, and we call these complex crossings. So that's where we have to go to talk to the Division of Highways, but we have to go and talk to each of the districts. So we had to streamline this process, and nothing was in place before that. We had to learn as we go. So this was a major challenge, and we were able to do this this year, where at least now we know who's responsible for doing what in each of the districts, how it's going to get done, how it's going to get delivered, who's going to pay for it, who's going to get reimbursed, and this is the only way we can actually get the project done on time. So this is it's a new lesson for us.
Yeah. So the reason I bring up, and I have the members that you have here, is because they share, you know, each of the DOTs have project challenges, right? When you're working on different kinds of projects. But when you look at the panel here, you're looking at people who are working with projects significantly higher magnitude, whether it's the high-speed rail, whether it's the CREATE project, or, you know, other projects out here. And so all of this, so many of the best practices that we talk about are simple things, which is like early coordination, making sure that at 30%, 60%, 90% of your project, you have the appropriate connection and communication. Making sure that you have annual meetings, and I'm going to ask the panel to talk about some of that. Making sure that the two parties are on the same page. We came out of the session from Kentucky, and you know, Amanda from CSX saying one of the big things her boss, who's the Director of Public Projects Manager, Tony, talked about is that all of their public projects managers have met with all of their state DOTs, and they meet with them so often that that communication and coordination is in place. And what it also does is that when a person changes, you're not just calling somebody on the phone who's not there anymore. You know, because you're constantly meeting. You know the new person who's coming on board. You know the person who's leaving. So those are the simple best practices. And projects like these take that coordination, communication, frequent meetings, project scheduling, just so many notches above. And so that's what I wanted to share with you. I wanted to ask you, Brad, to share something new that you have in Michigan, which is the CNGC process where you bring together, because now design, build, and you know, there's a new approach to working on projects. And so I wanted to bring that concept because that's something that's getting translated now to projects between the DOs. Can you explain what are the challenges you had and how did this process address it, and how can it be translated to projects involving DOTs and railroads?
I guess, first of all, is everybody familiar with CMGC, Construction Manager General Contractor? If you're not, it's a method of delivering a project kind of like design build, where you have the contractor on board early, except for in a design build environment, you have one contract with a design build team that would include the contractor and the designer. In the case of CMGC, the owner, the state DOT in our case, has two separate contracts. We have one with our designer and another one with the contractor. We bring a contractor on board on a project early as design is just beginning. Typically, it's a qualifications-based selection. It's not low bid. It's a little bit different for some of our contractors to kind of culturally get their heads around. But the idea is to bring them in early in the process when we have either complex work or there's complex staging and constructability issues that we could really benefit from having their input during the design phase so that we can tailor the design to make it as efficient as possible for us, for the motorists. And in this case, we haven't done it yet, but we're just about to start a CMGC project on a rail job. We've kind of picked some of the low-hanging fruits off of our accelerated rail program, the easier stuff, I guess. But now we're getting into some projects that really have the potential to affect rail service. So we want to get that contractor on board up front, early, bring them in with the rail providers to talk about what means and methods they actually have, what equipment they have, what can they do in certain time frames, what can we do to make sure that our design absolutely minimizes the impacts to obviously to the rail providers and our motoring public as well. So I'm looking forward to it. We've done, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 CMGC jobs in the state of Michigan already, mostly on highways and bridges and some other complex slope failure type projects. But it really seems to be a benefit to have that input up front during construction, or I'm sorry, during design, so that we get their input and make it as efficient as possible.
Yeah. Dan, would you share some of your perspectives on other best practices, whether it's agreements or coordination, collaboration, or any of those best practices that you have on projects involving DOTs and railroads? Because you do have some master agreements. You have one of the big things that NS has always talked about is when we start a conversation and finish a conversation with the community of interest, Dave Wyatt would always say, I would ask him, can you share your closing thoughts? And he would say, Shobna, it's always the 3 C's. And I thought it was coordination, communication, and collaboration. And he said, it's really communication, and more communication. So, but you have some best practices that you want to share.
Yeah, I guess I can continue on with this. You know, as he was talking about bringing in contractors early, things like that, that's a great idea. You know, setting those expectations as early on, you know, even before, say it's not a CMGC project, you know, but any kind of project, just kind of trying to get your head wrapped around the challenges you're going to be facing in the construction phase. That's a big deal, you know, especially with right now the railroads. You know, I think all railroads have hit a peak in business. That, you know, we're all seeing record number trains. We're running record number trains, more than we ever have in history. Well, that's a great thing for business in the United States and, you know, all the industries. Well, it's a hard thing for construction projects around us, okay, you know, because you don't want to stop the trains. And so we try to get those expectations out, the reasonable timelines, you know, like I was talking about before, and our guys. You know, there's a lot of things to talk about here. You know, flagging, okay, to have a flagman on a project, you know, first of all, that can be an additional expense. You don't want that to go on for really, you know, any longer than you have to. But at the same time, you have to have one there. He provides the safety for everyone on site. He lets you know when a train is coming. He has a radio. He is talking to the dispatchers and to the trains. And so, you know, you have to have that. It's, you know, it's a federal requirement. But also, you don't want to, of course, we don't want to blow anybody's budget out. You don't want to blow your budget out on the construction side. And so knowing what you're up against, you know, for those timelines, to have, you know, how long is a flagman going to be needed there? You know, how can we, you know, create maximum efficiency, you know, for track time, Okay, of course, that's at a premium right now, which basically means, for those of you that don't understand, as you know, it's a block of time where no trains will come in to that, cross through that area. So that way, you know, the outside contractor can do his work. And we're having to find, you know, the best case solutions for that, watching those trains, there are train schedules, but things always change. So we're having to try to find those times where you have the best chance to have multiple hours open, you know, where we can get that track time where it doesn't disrupt our operations and you maximize the time for the contractors. On the agreement side also, this is something small, but you know, we're always looking for even the simplest things. Right of entries, you know, down to just a pavement overlay, you know, a milling and paving project. Instead of bringing in consultants that can to do the reviews for this and kind of draw the price up, we're looking at new solutions. We're just getting a right of entry to handle if there's no crossing work being done or no widening. If you're not changing the footprint of the roadway, then maybe just handling this under just a right of entry. You know, just a one-time fee, get a flagman out there for a day or two, just to bring those costs down a little bit, make it easier on everybody. And a lot of this information, go to our website, you know, www.nscorp.com, and there's a little search window in the bottom left of the screen, and type in what you're looking for, and there's a pretty good chance, you know, there's some kind of literature on how to handle that situation, you know, whether it be a right of entry or a public project. And that's also where you can find that public project manual we were talking about before, which, you know, she also has. But those are just a few things. And any kind of safety initiatives also, even down to job briefings on site, we're looking at ways to tailor that to the public projects, to kind of get everybody, you know, working with the DOTs and the contractors that aren't familiar with working on railroad property, having job briefings tailored to them. So that way it kind of gets them familiar with the language and what to expect, you know, on any given day.
Yeah. Francisco, would you like to share any of the other best practices that Illinois DOT uses on projects involving railroads?
What I can think about is all about communication, as he said. It's especially, and I can speak about my project, it's the only way to get it done is to make sure that everybody is on the same page. So it's either through agreements, through construction agreements or cooperative agreements, like the master agreement between us and the Federal Railroad Administration, by which we were able to get the money, or the construction agreement between Union Pacific and us, which has been amended already 4 times, and you can find the amendments on our public website, i.hsr.org. But also with the local communities, when we have to rebuild the station does not belong to the railroad. It's purchased by either the city or a local community. So there has to be what we call an intergovernmental agreement, where they know exactly what they have to do, what they're supposed to do, what are their rights and responsibilities, and so forth.
Also the level of meetings. You were talking about the number of meetings and the kinds of meeting to update everybody, not just with the railroads, but internally.
Yeah, if you see my calendar, it's a maze. I mean, we got, with the FRA, our department has a quarterly meeting to bring the FRA up to speed on what on the work being accomplished, what are the challenges, what are the issues that we need to resolve, and the remaining work to be done. Once a year, the FRA will actually come out and take a look at the project, and we will organize a high rail trip from St. Louis up to Chicago. We did that last week. And then we have monthly meetings with our consultant, where we bring together the people working on the grade crossing design, the people working together on the stations, the people working together on the positive train control, and the people working on the acquisition of the rolling stock. Which, by the way, I forgot to say, our department is leading a multi-state initiative to purchase 188 rail cars. Well, actually, I take it back. The state of California is leading that initiative, and we are leading the initiative to purchase the locomotives. So that's going to be part of the big package that we're going to deliver in 2017 to have not only a rebuild track but also new train sets. And that job is specifically handled by my boss, John Oyman, who's looking after and he has weekly meetings to actually make sure that both the procurement and delivery are on time. So this is how we kind of handle it.
Okay. Now, I know we have a lot of questions to ask. I want to just give a minute each to the panel members because it's, we're running close to time. Yes. And I want each of you, starting with Mike, to give your closing thoughts and big picture items, and we'll go down the table right here.
Before I do that, I wanted to add one more thing regarding the coordination effort. You mentioned the 3 C's. I think there's a 4th C that needs to be incorporated into the thought process, and that's compromise. Compromise within the organizations, within a DOT, within the state government, compromise between our agencies, Commerce Commission, and IDOT has grown over the years. Compromise between the state agencies and the railroad industry. Compromise between the different departments in the railroad. We know for a fact that the operating department runs the engine in the railroads. Whatever they say goes. And when a railroad is looking to implement an improvement that is in their best interest, that suits their needs, they're more than willing to go above and beyond to help a state DOT or a local community to make it happen. When the shoe's on the other foot, it's not so much. So I think the idea of compromise amongst all the parties needs to be implemented into all the project development.
Any questions? I want to make sure that if there's any questions, I give you first time for that. Okay. Closing thoughts as we go as we sort of close out this this discussion.
Well, again, just from a public safety standpoint, I think public safety needs to be foremost in the minds of everybody involved in these types of projects. We're not involved in highway improvements, but we are involved in the public safety aspect. So that's where we weigh in on these when we are asked. Because we're a public service commission, we regulate transportation in Illinois, particularly freight railroads. So everything that's being proposed from a public safety standpoint has to be approved by our office. So we have that opportunity to either say, yes, you're doing it the right way, or here you make some changes. Early coordination has become paramount, and all the parties here, except for Michigan, because we're not involved with them, but the railroad industry, IDOT, knows that, the local agencies know that, so they know that we need to be involved from the get-go, and they do that. That's very good communication and coordination. The compromise we're still working on.
All right, thank you. We call it collaboration and partnering. Go ahead.
Well, I have to also add the safety. Safety, that's the big S on the railroads. We also strive on that, even when trying to deliver this project. So that's why we have to work with the railroad, with the ICC. And as a closing remarks, I think we are getting like a unique experience where we're implementing the first fully shared corridor in the country, where we will have, in the long term, we will have an equal number of freight trains and an equal number of passenger trains. A couple of years ago, we submitted an environmental impact statement to do the double tracking of the entire corridor and also to include the expansion of the passenger rail service. But going into a shorter range, next year our major milestone is to expand 110 miles per hour from Dwight, which is about 20 miles south of Joliet, down to the village of Carlinville. And there's a lot of work for us to continue. We have less than 3 years to finish up all the activities, and we have still a ton of money that we have to spend before it goes away by magic, as we all know. And then beyond that, I have to say that a few years ago I did a study on behalf of IDOT when I was still a PhD student at the University of Illinois to bring to the Midwest a 220 mile per hour system to connect Chicago down to St. Louis and Indianapolis. So our major efforts now are to improve the service, or to bring the service to 110, maybe do the double track, so then we have enough, so then we can generate enough success and ridership to actually build a business case to say, okay, now we can try and be a little bit more bold and go to 220 mile per hour, which is a completely separated system, no interference with other existing railroads, freight carriers, or highways.
Thank you. Dan?
Just like the other two gentlemen started off, safety is always the number one issue, and that's the reason we have a lot of these systems in place. A lot of these processes are totally built around the safety issue. You know, and as for the communication part of it, that's the second most. I guess really that's the most important thing: communication. Just to keep everybody up to speed, to stay in front, you know, and define the potential problems down the road. That's what you want to do. You want to be proactive and head off any problems you foresee with a project, and get everybody on board. Hey, is this going to be a problem? And just get those conversations started, and then working together. That's there's nothing more important than that, and nobody wants that more. Okay, it only makes all of our lives easier to really establish a good relationship, to define what you know, what we need, what the DOTs need to get something resolved, and that's kind of the best way I can say it. But yeah, just to always understand, just keep those, you know, even when you're facing challenges, as long as those communication lines are open, then, you know, you can continue to move forward.
I know we're running out of time, but I want to give Brad an opportunity to give closing thoughts.
As I'm sitting here, I'm thinking about the efforts that us, and I know a lot of other state DOTs have put a lot of time and effort into things like context-sensitive solution, context-sensitive design. We've developed our guidelines for stakeholder engagement, pretty robust program that we have now. But honestly, I think most of our stakeholder engagement has been engaging the local agencies. How is it going to affect the locals? What are the things that we can do on our projects? But I think we need to expand that a little bit. Same process, same thought process. It's the 3 C's, and then the 4th C, even that Mike mentioned, you know, complete streets and things like that the rest of the road design folks have to deal with. The same concepts apply.
All right, thank you. I know there are questions. If there are questions that have come online, trust me, we will get them back. We will get our panel to respond to you on all of those. I think we're just sort of coming to the last leg here, and Joe's going to give some closing thoughts.
Although we didn't have any questions, I'm pretty sure
No, there are.
a bunch of questions. Hello? Yeah, now it is. Okay. So, R16 participated in what we considered, actually, FHWA and AASHTO felt that this was such an important initiative, they put aside funding under the Implementation Assistance Program. R16 participated in round 2, and under that initiative, we actually had 4 offerings at the lead adopter incentive, and that was at $75,000. For any state that was selected, as well as on top of that, we provide some technical support as well as technical assistance. Upcoming events, actually, first let me tell you the states. The states that actually got that selection was South Dakota, Arkansas, Colorado, and Pennsylvania. We're in the process of moving forward with helping them, providing the technical assistance for them to move forward with that. We actually had 3 offerings at the user incentive level, and that was $25,000, and that could be to work with the railroads or to kind of just look at some of the internal processes that you may be able to use and how this R16, the solution, can be used into your organization. And the states that received that was Texas, Idaho, and California. So we are doing this again. The announcements will go out in January, and we haven't determined the monetary amount or the technical assistance or how many awards we'll be looking at. We are considering looking at it at the lead adopter as well as the user incentive, so it's very similar to round 2. Also, under ADC, I'm pretty sure, actually this was discussed during your STIC, during the general session about the STIC funding, and I just want to reiterate that under the STIC program, we have annually And I think, as Butch mentioned, we're now into a new year. There's up to $100,000 available through the sticks for implementing one of these innovations, as well as the aid demo program. And I believe that was up to $1 million to utilize an innovation on a project. And we also, the last one Butch mentioned was the, in MAP 21, they actually had under Section 1304, you were able to increase the federal share from 80% to 85% for utilizing one of these innovations on one of your projects. So here's some additional resources. You'll find that this will basically provide some of the old information that came out in SHRP2, which is still relevant. We can get more details about the innovations and how they could be used. And so if you have any questions, like I said, like Shobana said, the panel will be available. But also I'm the primary contact for SHRP2 and EDC, but we also have some additional contacts. So at this time,
I have some closing thoughts over. What I want to say is that people that you see here on the panel, including Joe and FHRA, and really the community of interest of stakeholders, I appreciate very much Thomas Bracey from NS having pulled off Dan at short notice and making him available to come to this discussion. So same thing will happen with CSX. It really is such a thrill for Joe and I to be engaged with this community where people are, same with Brad and everybody else on the panel, who are so excited about this project that when we call them, they actually make time, set aside time, their other activities to try and come and engage in this activity. So from the bottom of our hearts, we want to thank them. What this is also important for us is as we move forward into implementation, we obviously want to have this engagement continue because we want to take these realities and make a difference in the projects involving the DOTs and the railroads. So I just wanted to close out thanking all of the community of interest members who are not here today, as well as the members who are on the panel. So thank you very much. With that, I think this session is closed. Your panel members are here. If you have questions, feel free to come and ask. Also note that we know that you have asked questions online, and because we've been so engaged in this discussion, we may not have addressed your questions in our panel discussion. We will make sure my technical team and FRA responsible personnel are letting us know that there are questions. We will make sure that if you had sent in a question, we will get the answer to you. So with that, thank you. Joe?